I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
that would be the hope. And it's not going to get rid of everything. It's not the cure all, that's for sure. But
yeah, yeah.
it
You're
would
making
give
my
some
you're
reduction.
making my little ANCAP brain react right now, and yeah, ultimately, the first piece of private property that is sacrosanct, that is most important, is our bodies. So we should be allowed to do what we will with our own bodies. I mean, if I want to auction off my ass, I don't want to. That's not my preference. But if I wanted to auction off my ass to the highest bidder, I should have a right to do so. If I want to pay for a prostitute, I should have a right to do so. If I want to smoke pot, I should have a right to do so. I mean, if we look at American prisons, the majority of people that are in U.S. prisons, which per capita, we imprison more people in the United States, in a country of 300 million, per capita, we imprison more people than, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. They have 1 billion people, and we still imprison more people per capita than they do. And the majority of people that are in our prisons are in there for nonviolent drug crimes, meaning they decided to do something with their own body that the state says that they shouldn't do. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
And there's starting to become a shift on a lot of that stuff too. Some states are going out like with marijuana. It's like, okay, well, we're just going to hand out citations for smoking marijuana. The harder drugs are still an issue. And I do see some rightful issues that need to be dealt with on the harder drugs. But, for the addicts and stuff like that, I don't see gelling them for possession being a good idea. If anything,
No, it makes no
it's a
sense.
medical issue. Addiction
Right, exactly.
is a straight up medical issue that certainly needs to be treated.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that I think it should be looked at as a medical issue. Some things Europe gets right better than us as far as the managers of their tax farms or their government is concerned. That sometimes things in Europe are better managed than they are here. But ultimately, when we're talking about government, we're talking about we're talking about tyranny, we're talking about oppression, we're talking about control and dominance. I would like it if we could evolve as humans into a better system than government. There's got to be an evolution. Societies need to evolve into something else, in my humble opinion.
Well, when it comes to those, that's really dependent on the society at whole and how it gradually changes on its own with its own cultural evolution. I mean, just look. Granted, a good portion of the United States culture originally came from the United Kingdom. Well, from England at the time.
Yeah, especially our laws. It's all based on British common law. Is the backbone of our legal system.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Which, pretty much evolved out of a mixture of the, I think it's the Anglo-Saxon group, the Celts and all that stuff, and the Roman Empire.
Exactly.
Which, gave a huge foundation. And, our laws, the Roman laws spawned sort of from the Egyptian stuff.
Sure.
And
the law of business, the law of business is something called UCC, or it's a universal or uniform commercial code, and that is based on the ancient canon law of ancient Rome, because when they would trade back then, so our universal or uniform, I forget which one it is. It's either uniform commercial code or universal.
It's uniform commercial code.
Yeah, that is all based on the law of ancient Rome, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. It's not changed very much. I mean,
the changes that
it's been modernized, but the backbone of it, the basic structure of it is pretty much the same.
Yeah, and I have to say, for a book of recommendations, it's not too bad. I've looked at some of the stuff there, and there's been some interesting regulations and stuff they got in there. There's a few things I do have some gripes. It's been a while since I've read it, though. But nonetheless, it's quite the interesting thing of how it comes about, and how some places actually look at it and go, okay, well, we should institute this part, or we should go along with these guidelines.
Some of the stuff in UCC that bothers me is the stuff about Codex Alimentarius. There's an actual international harmonization of how much nutrients can go in various food crops, and it's actually, setting an upper threshold for how much vitamin K you can have in kale or whatever. It's kind of creepy that there's a supernatural or super national body, which like executive boards that operate on multiple continents that are determining this, and I find that kind of disturbing.
Oh yeah, well, how should I put it? Everybody wants to have their fingers in the pot when something's big.
Oh,
and they want to be, if it's going to have massive influence on an international scale, everybody's going to want to have their little angle that's put in there, either just because it helps add to their reputation or because it's something that they actually truly believe in. And so when it comes to that, I'm not too surprised that you have people. It's sort of like with the some of the UN charters that they try to push and go fly in the face of the United States Constitution when it comes to like firearms ownership or some freedom of speech stuff, like where they're trying to police bullying and all that stuff.
I'm going to be really good, and I'm not going to use the F-bomb, but I will say F the UN, and here's my reason why. When you look at the UN Charter, and then you open up Black's Law Dictionary of legal terms, right?
Yeah.
If you use a Black's Law dictionary and you look at the UN Charter, the quote unquote rights that are guaranteed to people in the UN Charter are merely privileges. If you analyze the semantics, they are merely privileges that government grants people. They're not considered unalienable rights. They're considered privileges. And yet the UN and its international court in The Hague is always heralded in the corporate media as being this great fix-all for everything. But personally, I think government is force, government is evil, but I would much rather have a government that claims that rights are unalienable than a government that claims that rights are privileges. That's a big difference. I'm an anarchist. I live under the tyranny of government, but I very much well understand that I would much rather live under a, this pale remnant of a half-dead constitutional republic that we have here in the United States. It's still a better system than a UN system. So, F the UN. And if you think about it, the UN's always talking about let's establish treaties of non-proliferation of various weapons, whether it's landmines or whether it's nuclear weapons or whether it's small arms. But what I find hilarious is the permanent members, the 8. I think they're 8 or 10. I forget.
G8.
But the G8, the 8 permanent members of the UN Security Council, who has voting veto power over all the rest of them, are the biggest arms dealers in the world. So everybody at the core of all the nations that are at the core of the United Nations, yet the UN have these political mouthpieces that are just flapping 24/7 about weapon non-proliferation. Yet the G8 are the most prolific weapons producers in the history of the world, and they aren't slowing down manufacturing anything. All these child soldiers running around with AK-47s, and all this stuff. You can thank the permanent members of the UN Security Council for, all these small arms being in third world countries, because, a G8 country will produce it and then they'll sell it to a quote unquote legitimate buyer, and then that legitimate buyer will pass it to another group and another group, and then eventually it's in the hands of third world children, child soldiers, and they're like massacring villages. And the UN is a political organization. It's not a legal organization. Like I could go on and on for days. Their intergovernmental panel on climate change is another political organization that claims that they're science based. But the UN, in my humble opinion, is the lesser of two evils. If I had to pick between the half dead, constitutional republic that we live here in the United States and giving the UN more influence, I would pick what we have now over that every single time.
And it's actually something that a lot of people are having an issue with over in Europe too, because with the whole Brexit thing, with the UK voting to leave, because as is the EU does it's sort of like a weaker version of the federal United States level, except the countries appoint. Well, the government of the countries appoint the representatives; they're not voted upon, and so there is no direct democracy. It's an indirect kind of thing when it comes to the people that get appointed to the EU.
Right.